And joining me now, Michael Derham, who is a senior lecturer specializing on Latin America at Northumbria University in the UK, and Sedat Aybar, who heads the economic department at Istanbul Aydin University. Thank you both for joining me today.
Thank you.
Mr. Aybar, I'll start with you. The Turkish president was one of the first leaders to congratulate Nicolas Maduro when he won the presidency and to voice support for him during this current political crisis. Why is Erdogan so confident in Maduro's legitimacy? And talk to us, if you can, a little bit about the relationship between Erdogan and Maduro itself.
Probably it is coming from the fact that Maduro is the legitimate leader of Venezuela. And Erdogan, Turkish president, has been complaining about the similar issues that he's been subjected to, particularly from the Western power centers, Washington, D.C., and sometimes from the EU, that he perceives that undermines his own authority, which is now directed at Maduro. So there is a kind of sympathy that is developing on Erdogan's part for Maduro, that Maduro is, he's a legitimate leader, he's an elected leader in Venezuela, despite all the economic difficulties that the country is facing. He's still the legitimate leader. And in a way that international order is, arranging what is to become out of Venezuela, is pushing Erdogan or developing for Maduro a sympathy towards Venezuelan people and Maduro himself. So that international order and the arrangements around it and the way in which the United States wants to exercise its power of these things.
I want to get to my other guest here real quickly, Mr. Derham. What do we know about Juan Guaido? We don't really know much about him because he really only came on the international stage about 2 weeks ago when he declared himself interim president. We know he's a young guy, 35 years old, but who is he?
Well, your guess is as good as mine. He isn't very well known. He is 35. He's been schooled in the United States. He has brown skin, and I think that's important. And I also think he's disposable to the United States. I think he's, to some degree, been forced into pronouncing himself president against a democratically elected president, as we've already heard. And so he's got himself involved with the United States, but they're not very nice people to get involved with. I think they're pressuring him. And as I say, I think he's ultimately disposable. They will look around for somebody in the medium term who's more acceptable to them, I think, really. I think he's a patsy, as they say in the United States.
Mr. Aybar, you talked about how Turkey has dealt with some of the similar issues that Venezuela is dealing with. Maduro has consistently accused the U.S. of deliberately sabotaging his country's economy. Is there proof of that? And does Turkey agree? Because Turkey made those same allegations last year when the Turkish lira plummeted.
Absolutely. I mean, these are not allegations, but with regards to what's happening in Venezuela, it's not a secret that the United States has been putting forward policies that undermines country's stability for a very, very long time, even before Maduro. When Chavez was the president, he was an elected president, and there has been coup attempts against Chavez. There has been assassination attempts against Chavez, and the originating dynamics of those attempts are not generated from within Venezuela, but it came from outside. Now, when we look at the affairs in the world and the way in which those affairs are organized, in President Erdogan's words, he constantly criticizes these affairs that only 5 superpowers at the United Nations Security Council, they decide on the future of the world. And he constantly says the world is bigger than 5. That is to say, when we consider troubles that the world is going through during this era, when we look at those things, these are inevitably bringing out those complaints and the history of that undermining dynamics is, of course, raising some eyebrows, not only in Ankara, but also in Russia, in China, and many other places around the world.
Okay. How much popularity does Guaido really enjoy in Venezuela and internationally? You called him a patsy to the United States and disposable. I mean, do people really think that he will be able to run Venezuela better?
Well, he hasn't got any policies to run Venezuela. The only policy which unites the opposition is to get rid of Maduro and to get control of the oil industry, to get control of the treasury. That's it. And so we haven't heard any strategies, any programs. The United States will come in. They've promised £20 million, I think, for emergency food aid. They want to call Venezuela a humanitarian crisis, which means then that other countries are allowed to go in to resolve that humanitarian crisis, and that's what Venezuela doesn't want. How popular is he? Well, he's popular with the people who want to change and who have forgotten that today's opposition have been in power before, between 1958 and 1998. Same social class, some of the same political parties. And honestly, when I first went to Venezuela in 1997, I looked out of the window at Caracas airport. I was horrified by the poverty I saw. And I'd lived in Peru for a year. I'd never seen anything like that. And this was an oil state with arguably the biggest reserves in the world. It should not be like that. But that's where it was taken to by today's opposition. And so you also have to look forward. The Venezuelan people know what's going to happen when the opposition takes over. The same thing happened during the short coup in 2002. It's a very bloody coup, and it only lasted 3 days. So you have to look back, you have to look forward to understand what's happening today. People might not like Maduro, certainly he's no Chavez, but they also know what they're going to expect with the opposition.
Yeah, it's really a terrible situation. Is Erdogan's support for Maduro just another way for Turkey to show that it's pursuing an independent foreign policy from the United States?
That is part of it, but there's also Turkey's stand vis-a-vis Venezuelan crisis is to take side on the despised and impoverished, the bullied nation. Now, Turkey doesn't accept to be bullied. Turkey doesn't accept other nations being bullied. But what is going on in Venezuela today is a multi-layered crisis. At one level, this crisis is relating to economic affairs and how the economy is run. And as far as that's concerned, it's a disaster in Venezuela. But also, in the same time, that multi-layered crisis relates to political side of it. And when it comes to politics, then how this is going to unbundle and unfolded for the future of Venezuela, whether Venezuelan indigenous people are going to have a say on it, or is it the superpowers, the more powerful, going to push Venezuela into a political situation? At that stage, at that echelon, Turkey is not going to accept that kind of bullying, and not only for Venezuela, but for other parts of the world as well.
A very difficult situation for sure. Michael Derham and Sedat Aybar, thank you for joining us today.